Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. We're really pleased to be here. And today we're going to be looking at how much does upgrading to LED lighting cost for athletic tracks. So before we get started, for anyone who's not used Zoom before, just a little bit of webinar protocol. So you're all muted and it's only ourselves, the presenters, who can chat. If you'd like to talk to us, we've got the chat function and the Q&A section. Please put any questions into the Q&A section and we'll answer them as we go along or at the very end. Any resources that we mentioned during the webinar, we will send out an email afterwards with links to everything. And we'll also send a recording of this webinar so you can rewatch or pass it on to any of your colleagues who may want to watch it. And we've also got a quick survey at the end when you exit the webinar with just like a little bit of feedback on how you think we've done today and any topics you'd like us to cover in the future. So today, first off, we're going to do some introductions to our wonderful presenters. And for those of you who don't know us, a little bit about Midstream Lighting. And then we'll get into the main presentation where we look at how much does LED floodlighting cost. First off, we'll look at the differences between retrofit and a new install. And then we'll look at the costs of each of those. And we've got Ed talking to us a little bit about what funding ideas are out there and things you can do for self-funding. And then, of course, at the end, we've got time for questions. So first off, my name's Sophie and I work in marketing here at Midstream Lighting, and I'm very pleased to be your host today. And next up, we've got my colleague, Patrick. Patrick, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone, please?
Excuse me. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Patrick. I'm the National Sales Manager for Sport. I've been in the industry for over 10 years at Midstream coming up for 4 years now. I look after all the sports projects, predominantly in the south from Birmingham down. One of my colleagues, Sam Thompson, he looks after projects north of that. My role in the company is I look at the best solutions to meet the specific needs of each facility from the initial point of contact right through to completion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Patrick. And we've also got the awesome Ed from England Athletics. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Sophie. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm Ed Hunt. I'm National Facilities and Planning Manager with England Athletics. So I help people like yourselves who are on the call today, venue managers, clubs, etc., who look after our stock of synthetic athletics tracks across the country and help with new tracks and refurbs of existing facilities. My background is in sport. I've had 25, 30 years in sport now, and I have come from the operator side. I used to be Chief Executive of a Leisure Trust, so I know some of the challenges that are faced by operators. So yeah, thanks, Sophie.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much for joining us today. So for those of you who don't know us, we're Midstream Lighting. We're a full turnkey specialist manufacturer of LED lighting floodlight systems. And we are specialists, not generalists. And by that, I mean that we make products and solutions only for our sectors, sports being one of them. And then we also work in the maritime and aviation sectors. We design and manufacture all of our own products, and we do this to meet our customers' needs. We have a fantastic R&D team based in Italy, and we've also got a couple of other offices around the world, including here in London. And we don't just manufacture products, we offer the full solution. That's everything from lighting design at the beginning, any maintenance you may need, training, and we like to share our knowledge with our customers as well. And why we do that is we see ourselves really as thought leaders, and we want to help educate the sector. And why we're here today is that we're really proud to be the official lighting partner of England Athletics. We've been working together for over 4 years now on multiple projects across the UK, and we hope to do many more in the future. So before we get started, we would just love to know a little bit about you, what your goals are today, and what you've got going on currently. So in a moment, you're going to see a box pop up with poll options. Please select the one most relevant to you. Okay, the box should be up now, and I'll just give you 30 seconds to vote. Okay, it's going to give you another 10 seconds. Okay, fantastic. Brilliant. So as we suspected, the majority of you have older lighting systems. We don't have anyone who doesn't have lighting, which is interesting. We are going to still cover that, but only very quickly, just to give anyone an idea. And we've actually got some people who already have LED floodlights. Okay. Brilliant. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Patrick now, who will take you through the presentation.
Thank you, Sophie. So first of all, so when we're talking about LED installations, we typically categorize them into two groups. So we have retrofits and new installs. So if we start with retrofits, this is where you've already got some sort of existing lighting. So everyone on the poll here today, and we're trying to reuse that existing infrastructure and swapping over just the heads. So reusing the masts, the brackets, the electrics, which is the cabling, the breakers, controls, etc. And simply we're just taking the old heads and gear off and replacing them with new LED heads and drivers. Also included with that, we have testing and commissioning, and that's both the light levels on the track to make sure we're hitting the required lighting levels, and checking the electrics are up to British standards. These projects tend to be much quicker, and there's less upfront cost. With your new installs, so here you've either got a very old system that can't be reused, or there's no lighting there at all. So in these projects, we're having to supply and install new masts, cabling, etc. There's the associated civils with that, so the trenching for the cables, the foundations for the masts, and then at the end you've still got that same test and commissioning that we talked about with the retrofit. And these tend to be much bigger projects. There's more upfront cost and they're longer timescales. So if we move on to the next slide, and we'll look at the retrofit examples. So with athletics, we've got quite unique challenges with quite broad ranges in prices compared with, say, other sports, just because of the variables involved. So for example, so we start with the different lighting standards. So for more in-depth in terms of what the lighting standards are, I would refer you to our lighting guide, which we will share a link to at the end. But broadly speaking, you've got your class 3, so 100 lux or community recreational use, your 200 lux system, so club level, which is typically what we install most of the time, and then your international premier competition 500 lux system plus. On top of that, we've got the various areas that we're looking to light. So with most sports, your football, your rugbies, your hockeys, we're not talking about a rectangular pitch. With athletics, you've got an oval track, you've got the infield, which can either be used for throwing events or football pitches. You've also got the Ds within the track, and then often there'll be a long jump area that's separate to all of that as well. And then on top of that, you've got everything in between. So on one of the projects we're working on, we're lighting the track, the long jump, and just one of the Ds where they've got a high jump area. So the variables are great in terms of just the area that we're lighting. And then finally, that you've also got to consider the various layouts. So again, with most sports with rectangular pitches, we're typically looking at 4, 6, or 8 mast systems from 15 to 20 meters high. With athletics, you can have 4 all the way up to 14 columns plus, ranging in 6 to 30, 40 meters high masts. So again, the variables and complexities in finding an accurate price are challenging. So if we start with the track and infield example, with these projects, we're typically looking at 8 to 14 masts, at least 15 meters high, so we can get the light into that infield. Now, if the masts are all in sensible locations, we can access the head, so they're razor lower masts, we can get plant close to them. The brackets can all be reused, the cabling is in good condition, so we can reuse that. Then we're looking more towards that 28, 47, or £124,000 plus VAT mark, depending on the lighting spec that you need. On the other side, if the masts are in not ideal locations, so further back, and we need to replace the brackets, upgrade the electrics, hire an expensive plant to access the heads, then we're looking more towards that higher end, so the 36, the 70, 160k plus VAT mark. If we then move on to track only projects, here the columns don't need to be as high because we don't need to get the light into the middle of the pitch. The area is much smaller, so we don't need as many fittings. Then same rules apply so as before. So if mast locations are good, we can use the brackets, cabling, access is all good, then we're looking more towards that 20, 28 and 68,000 pound plus VAT mark. Now if the mast locations are not great, we have to replace the brackets, cabling, etc. Then we're at that higher end, that 30, 44, 96,000 pounds plus VAT mark that we're talking about. If we can move on to the next slide.
Before we do, Patrick, sorry, we've got a question that's probably relevant to ask now. So the question is, what is the typical height of a mast for a track only lit track?
So for track only, so we don't have to light into the infield. So they tend to be a little. You can go a little bit smaller. So I mean, I've seen examples of 6 meters. Not ideal, but you can work with that. It depends on very much on the individual tracks and where we can put those mast locations. Generally, there's a balance between the general rule is that the fewer masts you have, the taller they need to be to cover the area. The shorter they are, the more you need. So there's normally a nice balance of around about a 10-meter high mast with 10 or 12 columns around the outside, but it's very much dependent on the track itself. But that's as a general what we're looking at.
Thank you.
So if we have a closer look at the breakdown of what that retrofit cost looks like, if we take the 200 lux track and infield example, so on the floodlights side of things, so again where the masts are in optimal locations, we've got good heights, and then we can use fewer fittings. So we're looking around about that 35,000 pound mark. If the mast heights are not ideal, or they're not in a great location, then we'll need more fittings to light up that area to the same lighting specification. So then we can be getting closer to that 50,000 pound mark. On the installation side, so this is focused more on access. Do we need to touch the electrics? If access is good and we can reuse the electrics, the controls are good, then that 12,000 pound installation cost is achievable. If we need to get higher and expensive plant, we need longer time on site, we need to update the electrics, then we're looking more around that 20,000 pound plus VAT mark. And then another thing to touch upon, which we didn't mention in the last slide, are the controls. We didn't include those costs in the previous slide. So but it's worth considering for practical and cost-saving reasons. So ways of reducing your energy, practical reasons. So I'll give you an example. At Rugby and Northampton Athletics track, they used to have to control the lights manually by walking to the far end of the track, some 200 meters away from the entrance, which when they went to turn the lights on at night time, it plunged the whole area in complete darkness, and then they were traipsing through the track and the mud and etc. In the dark. So the main reason for them putting in a wires control system was to put it in by the entrance of the facility where there was some amenity car park lighting, and so controls are worth considering as well. Now in the past, typically that just meant on or off. Now with more sophisticated systems, we've got far more options, regardless of how it's currently wired up. We can use a wireless system to allow for dimming. So if we're again talking about a 200 lux system, then most of the time a training system of 100 lux is more than adequate. So you can have that 50% saving in with dimming. Also, we can zone it. So if you only work on your 100-meter sprints, or if you're just looking at the long jump or something like that, we can just zone it and just light those particular areas. And then there's also how you want to control the system. Do you want a portable device? Do you want to control it via a Wi-Fi system off-site, etc.? Now, all of that means that, for the very basic, simple system, you're looking at about £4,000 plus that up to a more sophisticated or singing or dancing system of about £15,000. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of what that's involved there. So yes, we move on to the next slide, then, please.
Thanks, Patrick. Before we move on, we've just got a question that's relevant here. Are the removal costs for old equipment included in this?
So yeah, so part of the costs that we factor in this are taking down the old head, stripping out the gear. Absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you. And delivery costs?
Delivery costs, so that, yeah, that's covered in the floodlights section, if you like. So that includes delivery to site.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
So if we then move on to the new build system, so this is where we're having to consider quite a few more variables. So, for example, this includes the cost of the mast, new cabling. We have to put in some controls and the associated groundwork. So those the foundations for the mast, trenching for the cabling, that type of thing. So again, if we can locate the mast in optimum locations, so there's no buildings in the way, there's no planning restrictions or in certain areas, or there's no tree protection orders, then and we can get good access to each mast location. We're going to need plant, but the size of the plant could be considerably less, and we can get a suitable access to a supply point nearby, 20, 30, 40 meters away. Then again, we're looking at that lower end, so that 66, 95, £200,000 plus that mark. If, however, we have to position the mast in funny locations, the supply point is 100 meters away or so, and we need to use bigger plant, can't quite get access to it as easily, then we're at that higher end, that 125, 170,000, £300,000 mark, depending on the lighting system that you need. On the track only, so generally again here we're talking fewer fittings, lower mast heights, smaller foundations, smaller cable sizes. So again, if we can put them in the optimum locations, supply point is nearby, we're at that lower end, that 44,000, 66, £120,000 plus that mark. And then on the other end of the scale, if mast positions are not non-optimal, supply is far away, then we're looking at that 75, 101, £770,000 plus that mark. If we move on to the next slide, we can look at how that's broken down. So similar to retrofit, so the floodlights don't really change here. It's still that range of, on the 200 lux in track and infield example, we're still looking at that 35 to £50,000 plus that mark. However, we now have to allow for, on the install side of things, not just the fitting of the fittings, but also groundworks, so the trenching and the mast and the foundations, erecting the masts, putting them up. We've also got, so you're looking at that 40 to £60,000 plus that mark. On the masts themselves, we've also got to put in new masts. So again, this varies on the height that we need. And if we can use sensible numbers, sensible heights, then supplying the mast to site, £20,000 plus that mark is we can get to. If not, then it can go up to £60,000 plus that. And then again, same as with the retrofit, the controls, that price range doesn't change. We're still looking at that for the very basic system, up to £15,000 for the more singing and dancing system. So I hope that's useful. That brings me to the end of my bit, and I'll hand you back over to Sophie.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Patrick. So now we're going to have a look at funding, and Ed's going to take you through this. So you've found out all the costs, but what can you do about raising some funds for that?
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Patrick. Yes, unfortunately, I don't have a magic pot of money. And some of the go-to sources, let's say they've dwindled over the past few years. Sport England's capital programmes kind of wound down since COVID. So there's not a lot of significant national capital out there, but there's plenty of local opportunities that are worth looking at. So I've just put a couple of examples. I believe Sophie's going to send the links out after the webinar. So Grantscape, for example, it allows you to look at local opportunities in your area and what grant funders will potentially fund. Suez and Veolia are two funds that athletics facilities have been successful in gaining for floodlighting projects in the recent past. So they're dependent upon the track itself. I emphasize the track should be in a postcode location that Suez and Veolia recognise as a priority area, which is usually within a couple of miles of their landfill sites. And then there's a short eligibility questionnaire, and then you can see if you can progress to access funding. Landfill Communities Fund does the same sort of thing. It identifies funding opportunities in your area. And then active sports partnerships, which used to be called county sports partnerships, they may well be able to help you source local funding opportunities, again, that are local to you. I kind of emphasize that they won't 100% fund your project. There would need to be some internal money that goes towards it. So they'll typically look at least 20%, probably more, of the complete capital cost of the works, and that you should apply for funding before any work takes place, not after or retrospectively. So it's important that you apply in advance, because the funders won't fund retrospective projects 9 times out of 10. Crowdfunding. So there's a crowdfunder site. So if there's clubs on the call or community groups, they can look to set up their own crowdfunding page to look at leveraging some funding from the members or the local community. And Sport England have a Active Together crowdfunding campaign, so they will match money that's been raised locally to help see a capital project through to fruition. So a couple of opportunities there. Preferential loans. I did notice that my former colleague Amy Frith is on the call, who works for Sporting Assets now. So Sporting Assets has done some great work with other governing bodies, not specifically athletics at this stage in terms of loans, but there is a link there. You can potentially look at that, and I'm sure Amy or colleagues would tell you whether there's any eligibility. So it's, as I say, at preferential rates, potentially, if there's an underpinning business plan or project that they could maybe help out with. And then local authorities, potentially with the rise in energy costs, they may, and sort of the environmental focus at the moment, carbon footprint, carbon reduction, they may well look to help either your venue, if it's a club managed venue, or their own venues, on an invest to save basis. So on the basis that they improve the lighting, LEDs much cleaner, you can zone it, it's lower energy costs. So they may look at putting some upfront capital in order to reduce the ongoing costs. If I could, Sophie, just give you an example. I know Pat Carlin's on the call from Mansfield Harriers. I think they were the one venue that do have LED lighting. Just as an example of how local funding works, the club, I know Mansfield Harriers put some money in, the district council put some money in. We actually had a little bit of money we can put in. And they also, I think it was the the Radford Trust put some money in as well, which is a local grant giving body that's near to Mansfield. So it just shows you that if you work together, the authority, the club, local funding partners, you can make things happen. And I know the track at Berry Hill and Mansfield was a fantastic example of how it can work.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you so much, Ed. And if you do want to see the story of Mansfield Harriers, we do have the video on our website, and we're really proud of that. So moving on now, we're going to take some questions. I can see that some of you have popped questions into the chat. If you can you pop them into the Q&A? It's just a little bit easier for us to answer, but we'll go through them anyway. So first up, we've got a question. What is the longevity of LED lighting? Patrick, do you mind answering that one for me?
Yeah, of course. So typically with when we were talking about conventional metal halide lighting, you would talk about a few thousand hours, so 3, maybe 4, 5,000 hours, that type of thing. Now these days with LEDs, we're talking tens of thousands, so 30, 40, 50,000 hours, that sort of range, depending on how you look after them and things like that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Our next question, on average, how long does it take to do a retrofit of a track and field install? Paddy, again for you.
So yeah, it depends on number of fittings, access, that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, typically within a couple of weeks, if we're on a track and infield lighting setup, which is a fairly typical setup, we would on a retrofit, yeah, within a couple of weeks.
Brilliant. And same along those same lines, once a purchase order has been issued, what's the typical lead time?
So I'm assuming we're talking retrofit again, based on the poll. So from PR received, you allow typically 6 weeks for manufacture, and then delivery to site. Then once on site, again that 2 weeks. So we like to think that in 8 weeks, a couple of months, we'll have a brand new lighting system installed.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We've got another question. How do we know if our mask can be reused?
Yeah, very good question. This is one we get asked a lot. So it depends on so the existing setup and what you've got there. But if you've and your attitude to risk. So there are guidelines on how you access this. So on an old system where you're increasing the head load and the number of fittings, then you'll want to do some sort of structural testing to make sure that we get some empirical data to make sure that what you've got, such as a non-destructive test, galvanized test, that type of thing, to make sure that it's suitable. You may even decide to look at it and go, it's not much got life in it, in which case put in a brand new system. On the other end, if it's if it's been 10 years since the install was done, it's been looked after well, we're not increasing the head weight, the number of fittings, that type of thing, then the risks are much lower, and then that we're more comfortable about reheading on the existing infrastructure. If you want to remove all that risk completely, then some sort of empirical testing on the existing setup would be advisable.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Patrick. We've got lots of questions. I'm just going to keep going for another 5 minutes. We really appreciate everyone's time so far. If you have to hop off, we understand. But we're just going to try and get through a couple more questions before we end the session. So our next question is, what are the typical savings on running costs versus conventional older lighting systems like halogen lighting?
So as a broad rule, if we're doing, say, a 1-for-1 replacement, and matching lighting spec, etc., for when it was brand new, then you would expect at least 50%, maybe a bit more. We've had, I know with the job that we did at Chelmsford, for example, we were able to improve the lighting spec and actually reduce the number of fittings. So there we were looking at close to 60-70% reduction. And then if you think on top of that, if you had a control system with zoning and dimming and use that, then you could get closer to that 90% plus mark. So yeah, again, it's very variable to your setup, what spec you're after, and what controls we're looking at. But yes, as a general rule, a 1-for-1 replacement, not touching the controls, etc., then at least 50%.
Thank you very much. We've got another question. Can the upgrade be done in stages?
So yes, so this is something we did at Doncaster Athletics Track. So the reason they staged it is purely down to funding. So they had a failing system where, especially on one of the masts. So what we did was we moved some fittings around of the old metal halides, and we put LED fittings on one of the masts, which is what they could afford at the time, to keep them going. And then the following year, when they raised up the funds, we were able to complete the whole track to LED. Now, so you can phase it that way, or you might want to just do, say, a long jump area and then the full track, or mix it up that way. But yeah, absolutely, phasing is an option.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We've got an add-on for the question earlier about timescales. What do timescales look like for a new install project?
So new install, so yeah, obviously we're looking much longer now. So assuming we planning and all that stuff from purchase order, you may want to allow a little bit longer for manufacture. So depending on what mast we've got, the mast might be the deciding factor on that. But yeah, maybe typically 6 to 8 weeks for manufacture. And then in terms of install, so obviously you've got all the groundworks to add on top. So you're probably looking at 4 weeks on site to do all the groundworks, install the mast, fit the fittings, aim them, test them, etc.
Brilliant, thank you very much. We've got another question. What lighting levels are recommended for a track at a school?
So it depends on the competition or level of play. So typically with a school, if it's just for the school, then they're not looking at sort of club competition level. Then that class 3, that 100 lux setup is what we're looking at, so that lower end. That said, most schools have some sort of club so affiliated with them. Most clubs at the schools that I've dealt with certainly have, in which case they may want the club may want that 200 lux for club competition standard.
Okay, brilliant. And actually on that, Ed, seeing as we've got you and you are the England athletics expert, accreditation, track mark accreditation, is there anything that people need to know about their lighting levels when it comes to that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to be too over officious. I mean, the venues are already getting the track and the field events inspected, but for licensed competition under lighting, we do require that the lighting has been inspected and that a lux level report has been done, and that's mainly to protect the safety of the officials on the infield and those doing technical events. So it's in very broad terms, if there is some form of lighting at a track, you can have basic track events under lights, but anything more than that, we'd want a track mark unit 5 completing, which demonstrates either class 1, class 2 or class 3 compliance. Obviously we would like to encourage operators to have a test done just to see how their lighting stacks up, and it helps the operator. It should, heaven forbid, there be any claims or anything relating to the lighting of the track, if they can fall back and say, well, we've had the lighting inspected and it meets the governing body's minimum standards, then that's always good. But equally, there's a cost. So if there is lighting and risk assessments are carried out in training and that sort of thing, then that's obviously acceptable. So hopefully that answers the question.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ed. And I'm going to call time. We've got a couple of other questions that we will follow up with on email. If anyone's not had a chance to answer their question, you can reply to the email we send out and we'd be more than happy to answer them or get back to you. But thank you very much for joining us today. Just a quick one on our floodlighting guide that we did mention. We'll include a link in it in the follow-up email. It's got some great tips in there for lighting. It's got charts about the lighting levels you should be looking for, tips around uniformity, and also a nice little guide in there for testing your own lighting as well, just to see where you're at. We'll include that in the follow-up email. Again, a big thank you from all of us here at Midstream and from Ed and the guys at England Athletics as well. Obviously, you've met Patrick today, but our colleague Sam, who works in the north, his details are on screen now at the moment if you'd like to get in contact, or as I said, you can reply to that email. But thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon, and a massive thank you as well to our speakers, Ed and Patrick. Thank you very much for your time today.